If you could go back in time, where would you go? You know the game. We've all played it as kids, even as adults. Some immediately say ancient Egypt to see the pyramids. Others might opt to see Jesus when he walked the streets of Jerusalem. More adventurous players might want to see what dinosaurs really looked like when they roamed the earth. But if you picked ancient Greece to see the Parthenon, then this is the show for you. (1669). General Francesco Morosini was shamed by the loss of the Venetian colony of Crete to the Ottoman Empire. He attempted to take back a portion of Greece by leading a ragtag band of warriors and mercenaries. As the Acropolis is surrounded by Venetians, the Turks take shelter on the hill, believing that the Venetian forces would not dare attack the Parthenon due to its historic significance. They strategically hid their gunpowder inside, a decision that would prove very unwise. While it is unknown if General Morosini knew of the gunpowder stocks in the Parthenon, he did know that there was a concentration of Turk forces there, making the Parthenon a pivotal battle site. After 3 days of shelling, a mortar struck the Parthenon and detonated the gunpowder inside, bringing the structure to its knees. The Acropolis. The word means high city. To the Athenians, it was the dwelling place of their patron goddess. It was a complex of temples dedicated mostly to Athena and her worship. To access the Acropolis, one must first pass through the Propylaea, the main processional gate. Once inside, you will pass a number of temples, including the Temple of Athena Nike, the goddess of victory. The Pinacoteca, the gallery of frescoes, as well as the sanctuary of Artemis Boronia, before standing face to face with the 9-meter bronze Athena Promachos, which means Athena who fights in the front line. Finally, we arrive at the steps of the crown jewel, the Parthenon, the most lavish and largest of Greek temples and the center of Athenian religious life. Built between 447 BCE and 432 BCE by order of the Greek statesman Pericles, the Parthenon that exists today has its own fascinating history. Pericles assigned the task of designing the Parthenon to architects Echinus and Callicrates, while Phidias was responsible for the art inside, including the legendary gold and ivory statue of Athena. The Parthenon suffered many calamities leading up to its current state of ruin. The first major blow to the temple was a fire in 267 CE due to arson. In the 6th century CE, during the Christian period, it was converted into a church, and many of the Parthenon sculptures were destroyed. In 1458, the temple turned church was once again reinvented, this time as a mosque with a minaret, when the city was surrendered to the Ottoman Empire. Before meeting its fate with General Francesco Morosini. It's common knowledge that many great minds and ideas were born in Greece. Plato, Socrates, and even Diogenes called Athens their home. Even the democratic system of government that we know today is modeled after that system invented in Athens. Similarly, Nashville, Tennessee was known as a center of learning, having established the nation's first public school system. During the Reconstruction era in the 19th century, following the Civil War, Nashville began to rapidly grow, thanks in no small part to industrialization and its geographic location regarding the railroads. Mary Ellen Pethel, author of the book Athens of the New South, College Life and the Making of Modern Nashville, writes, "At the center of this socially constructed enterprise were young men and women, both white and black, who had greater access to higher education through the city's newly established schools, including Vanderbilt University, one of the country's premier private schools, Fisk University, one of the nation's most prestigious black liberal arts universities, Ward Belmont, a junior college for women, David Lipscomb College, the Educational Center for the Church of Christ, Meharry Medical College, one of the country's few training centers for black medical professionals, and more. It is no wonder that Nashville came to be known as the Athens of the South, tying itself to Athena, the goddess of wisdom.
In Nashville, settled by families who understood the value of education, the citizens, as soon as their town was physically safe, founded a university, and education flourished here. Nashvillians became very proud of the nickname they'd acquired by the mid-19th century of Athens of the South. And so it was entirely logical when the state of Tennessee decided to celebrate its 100th birthday of statehood with a big World's Fair type exposition that Nashville would offer to build the art building and would build it as a copy of the Parthenon to remind everyone that they were the Athens of the South. The Tennessee Centennial and International Exposition took place between May and October of 1897. The last decades of the 19th century and the first of the 20th saw many such expositions. All were vaguely neoclassical in architectural style, and the most influential of these expositions was the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Although all these expositions favored the neoclassical style, Tennessee's Parthenon, the art building, was the only exact copy of a specific building from antiquity. Nearly 2 million people visited the fair from May to October, and that in an age when there were far fewer leisure hours and far less discretionary income for people.
The Centennial Exposition offered many delights for the eyes, as well as thrill rides, but there was also music. Songs written explicitly for the occasion.
The skies are just as true love. The skies are just as blue, and life is quite as joyous as 100 years ago. The southern sun is shining, the tender leaves are twining, and maids are just as bonny as 100 years ago. Their hearts are just as true, that their hands are willing to love, and life is just as joyous as 100 years ago.
After the centennial celebration ended, all of the buildings were torn down, as they were only meant to last the 6 months of the exposition. But the people of Nashville had fallen in love with their beloved Parthenon and did not want to see it destroyed. And so it stayed. But by the 1920s, it had begun to show its fair share of wear and tear. It was then decided to rebuild it and make it a permanent fixture of the city of Nashville.
George Zolnay, who had been the sculptor for the 1897 Parthenon, was employed in the 20s to design and make the metapies that go around the Doric frieze of the Parthenon. In addition, sculptors Bell Kenny and Leopold Schultz, a husband and wife sculpting team, were hired to create the pediment sculptures that fit on the east and west ends of the building. There was a great attention paid to accuracy, to making this building as near as possible like its predecessor. And so, in the interests of that accuracy, the city purchased from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, England, a set of casts of the marble fragments that remain from the ancient Parthenon. Kenny and Schultz used those casts and added clay where there was missing material, sculpted an entire figure of the composite plaster and clay, and then made molds of those composite figures into which the finished concrete aggregate was poured, and those figures were lifted up and put into position on the east and west pediments.
Work on the exterior of the building was completed by 1925. The Parthenon built for the centennial was not a replica on the inside. Its interior was a series of galleries for exhibiting the enormous collection of paintings and sculptures borrowed from Europe and throughout the United States for the exposition.
During the rebuilding, a man named James M. Cowan, an art collector who lived near Chicago but who had grown up in Middle Tennessee, heard about the rebuilding and offered to give part of his art collection to the city of Nashville to be housed at the Parthenon. He went through his art dealer in New York and had two conditions to his gift. First, there had to be a secure gallery inside the Parthenon for the collection, and second, he required to be anonymous until his death. The city happily complied with his conditions, and his collection arrived in 3 shipments, one of 21 paintings in 1927 and 2 shipments of 21 paintings each in 1929. Mr. Cowan died in December of 1930, and so he never saw his collection hanging at the Parthenon. But when he died, the collection was named for him and is on permanent exhibition.
The permanent structure, however, was to be a complete replica and as accurate as scholarship would allow. When the doors were opened to the public, 2 major elements were still missing: the great statue of Athena in the naos and the Ionic frieze on the exterior. Donations for the Athena accumulated over the years, and in 1982, the Park Board commissioned Nashville sculptor Alan LeQuire to recreate the 42-foot statue for the interior.
After you model something in clay, you then have to cast it, which is a process that I've had to use for the entire statue. Sculpturally speaking, it's a much better work because it was modeled in clay first. The statue is cast in gypsum cement, which is really just a hard plaster. It's reinforced with chopped fiberglass, which allows me to make a strong but lightweight structure. To a large extent, the process became a big construction project. At least that was going on at the same time that I was sculpting other parts, so that I really had two jobs. One as reconstructing the statue, which was purely technical, and at the same time still having to do the artistic part on the rest of the parts of it there. The sculptor of the original statue was Phidias, who also designed all the sculpture on the Parthenon. A lot of the decisions about details on the statue depend on your opinion of who Phidias was. Was he a great innovative sculptor or not? And I think he was. Before I got this commission, I hadn't done anything on this scale, although when I studied in Rome, I observed the construction of a 26-foot tall statue of the Virgin Mary for the island of Capri. Around the turn of the century in the United States, there were several sculptors who were working on this scale, and nothing on this scale has really been done since. It was exciting to me to rediscover simply the technical means to enlarge something to this scale. The Nashville Parthenon was built as part of the Centennial Exhibition at a time when they undertook massive sculptural projects like this. However, at that time they thought they did not have enough evidence to provide an accurate version of the statue. So this project, which I will complete in the next 6 months, is basically the end of a project which began in 1897. The original statue was almost entirely covered in cast gold plates. We are using real gold leaf in an attempt to make the statue as authentic as possible.
Altogether, the project was completed in May of 1990 and unveiled then, but had to wait another 12 years for the gilding and paint that makes the statue look as near as possible to Phidias' statue of antiquity.
Holding in her hand another Nike, another Greek goddess. Yeah?
Goddess of victory.
How tall is this Nike here?
Nike is 6'4".
See, isn't that ridiculous? For perspective, just to realize how big this statue is, think that
she's taller than any of us.
Exactly. I could be standing up there in her hand and be shorter than what's up there.
Yeah. So she's on a steel support system that goes all the way through her body, through this floor, through the gallery below where we were a few minutes ago, and into bedrock, so she's not going anywhere.
Inside the Parthenon are many interesting things. Besides the Athena and the Art Museum, there is an entire museum dedicated to the 1897 Centennial Exposition. There are also the casts obtained during the reconstruction to recreate the pediment sculptures. One of my favorite features, though, are the massive doors.
They are 24 feet tall, each one, and 6.5 feet wide and a foot thick, and each door weighs 7.5 tons.
15,000 pounds per door. Oh my gosh. I mean, I cannot imagine how this has to be balanced in order to, I mean, how does it work?
These doors are bronze and they're on a steel hinge with a ball-bearing collar at the top and the bottom. And they're just beautifully balanced. They were probably wood. I don't think they had the technology for bronze this large, but they were probably elaborately decorated with bronze.
Right.
They were probably very heavy, but maybe not 7.5 tons. And they had this track in the floor, so they had 2 points of movement on the floor, both the hinge and this other.
So they could put like a wheel under this or something, and it could roll along the track. That would take some of the weight off the hinges, which they couldn't really use quite a strong material for the hinges in. Very, very amazing.
While perhaps not widely known outside of Tennessee, the Nashville Parthenon had an attendance record of 300,000 in 2019. And in 2010, it even made it to Hollywood, being featured in the film Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. Besides the spot in a blockbuster Hollywood film, the Parthenon has also been used as a recording studio. It was also the subject of a light mapping show, where lights were projected onto the pediment sculptures to show what the Parthenon may have looked like in its original bright colors. Aside from the Parthenon, there is not much left from the Centennial Exposition except for the lagoon. People still stroll the grounds with their families and friends, but it's more parking lots and road than giant seesaws and plaster buildings. Nevertheless, the Parthenon has known a life worthy of any great hero's myth. From birth to near death several times over. From obscurity to wonder of human achievement. From ruin on one continent to reinvention on another. She has gone from a sacred place of worship to an awe-inspiring place of learning, overcoming adversity in ways that we should all aspire to. She is a hero in stone, a hero in concrete, and a hero to all who come to admire her, let they be in Athens or in Nashville. The Parthenon comes fully from Greece with glory.